we have a chance now with a range of new technologies, of which AI is the poster child, to really transform the way that we do business.
AI is transforming every corner of every business, but few sectors are seeing as profound of an impact as life sciences, and especially the pharmaceutical industry. In this episode, I'm joined by Chris Moore, European President at Veeva Systems, a company that's at the forefront of helping pharmaceutical companies especially streamline things like drug discovery, clinical trials, and physician engagement, ensuring treatments reach patients faster and more efficiently. We discuss the rise of AI in the pharmaceutical space and the practical ways it's improving R&D, accelerating drug launches, and automating processes that were once painfully manual. We also cover how the pandemic forced a rapid digital evolution in the sector and the emergence of the CIO and the Chief Digital Officer roles in driving technology strategy across the industry. Chris also shares his perspective on the challenges AI presents, especially for SaaS providers. And we also hear Chris's advice for enterprise organizations for securing their data. And we also explore what excites Chris the most about the future of AI in the life sciences world and how these innovations will shape the industry and change millions of people's lives in the years ahead. This is a fascinating, insight-packed conversation with a leading voice in the world of life sciences and pharmaceutical technology. This is Chris Moore. Chris Moore, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I've been really keen to talk to you. We haven't had too many guests on from the life sciences world for quite a while. Particularly interested in talking to you guys in light of all of this innovation that's going on right now and some of the incredible work you guys are doing. I'm going to ask you to do an introduction shortly, but before we go there, Chris, what does good leadership mean to you?
Before we do that even, Gareth, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on today. I'm very honoured to be part of your podcast and to join some of the incredible leaders that you've had so far. I think for me, what good leadership is all around is understanding the purpose and the vision of the organisation and then enabling the teams within it to do their best work, to be the best versions of themselves. That is both an environment where they feel free to take risks, but also creating those sort of pressure points where you push them out of their comfort zone. So again, they can be the best version of themselves.
Absolutely.
And also not just that, but to play off each other. I think, I've been very fortunate over the years to work in organizations with brilliant teams. And I think I've personally benefited, and hopefully others have benefited around, from just that insight, that knowledge that others bring that just make you better, that give you a different perspective and take you out of, I thought I could do it this way, but there's a better way there.
So Chris, in terms of your background, I understand your immediate background, or for much of your career, you've worked in the advisory management consultancy world. But I also understand that your first gig out of university was in the pharmaceutical space, if I'm not mistaken. So can you tell us a little bit about the early part of your career and why you pursued the direction that you ultimately did?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I ended up in the life sciences industry almost by chance. So I was sponsored through university by that great company that no longer exists, ICI.
I'm from a town called Merthyr Tydfil, actually, and they had a big site in Merthyr Tydfil. You may be aware of that. Yeah, an entire industrial estate was named after that factory, the ICI factory.
Oh, it's huge in that part of the world, around Runcorn, or around Blakely. It was an institution, ICI, and
Absolutely.
Just a phenomenal company. And so when I came to the end of my degree, I was very lucky that I was offered different roles throughout the organization. And the bit that was seen the most exciting out of all of them was pharmaceuticals. As you rightly pointed out, I started out with a real job. I started out working for ICI Pharmaceuticals, which has gone on to become AstraZeneca. And what that gave me, those first 4.5 years of my career was an insight into how a pharmaceutical company runs.
Yeah.
And in particular, I did a lot of work in the R&D function around regulatory affairs and clinical trials. And even though that is many moons ago now, that gave me a foundation to build off the rest of my career.
Absolutely. Obviously, you then proceeded to have a fairly long spell with PricewaterhouseCoopers. So could you tell us a little bit about that time? And then obviously, when you delved into the management consultancy world, how that shaped you as a leader?
Interestingly, before that even, I worked for a tiny little startup. So in all my time at ICI and then Zeneca, I always seemed to be put on projects that were doing the new or the different things. And typically there were consultants involved in it. After a while, you say to yourself, hold on a sec, all of the cool projects were with the consultant. Maybe I should give it a go. And around then, there was this tiny group called Kinesis. In fact, when I joined it, there were 12 people. But really interesting. One of the guys, in fact, my boss there, the CEO, he'd helped invent the recordable CD for Philips for music production. Great, quirky group. And I joined, very quickly took over the life sciences part of that. And we grew the business to the point where we were just shy of 100 people. Life sciences accounted for about 75% of the revenue and 95% of the profit. And we'd created a niche, which was looking at this emergent technology at the time, which was content management. And we did a lot of the work around a particular tool called Documentum in Europe for most of the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And that attracted a lot of interest because here we were, tiny company out of Swindon, of all places, exotic Swindon. And yet we were working for all of these multinationals. So a number of companies offered to buy us. We loved working with Coopers and Lybrand. There was a really good natural fit. So we sold ourselves to Coopers, which actually gave us that ability to grow to the next level.
Say Documentum, Chris.
Documentum, yes.
Was it part of OpenText?
No, it was before they'd sold themselves out to OpenText.
Right.
So It was when Documentum was the hot new kid in town, about mid-90s. And it come along with a really good client-server technology to address content management. And we did a lot of the work applying that in life sciences. So, as you rightly say, what the Kinesis time taught me was running a small business, a small startup, the immediacy, that fast turnover. If you don't run and operate, you don't exist. There's no buffer for non-performance. And it also gave us an immediacy of relationships with our customers. We were doing some really critical work. We were asking them to trust us as a tiny business. And so it was a real crash course in how to build deep relationships.
Sure.
And that served me very well moving into the partnerships, as we were then able to scale that. We helped Coopers build out the capability into the US, across Europe, and also into Asia Pacific, specifically in Japan. As was the way of the time, Coopers and Lybrand merged with PW. And at that point, the Kinesis business had become quite sizable. It had become increasingly integrated with the rest of Coopers and then PWC. So we were rolled in as a core part of the business. And I became a partner in the core PWC practice. We continued to grow it out. We started building product with Documentum. We also did some work building product with Oracle and really bringing together the industry to try and challenge how things have been done with how they could be done, bringing together industry with technology to come up with different solutions.
So were you preparing companies for the end of the world that was going to happen with the Y2K? Because it was around that time, wasn't it? You're talking there.
You know what, Gareth? I actually feel like I missed a whole shift there, because in my world, yes, we did a little bit of Y2K work, but actually the nature of the tools we were using, that was probably the lower end of what I personally got involved in. So when friends of mine who were in different parts of tech were anxiously standing by their phones as Y2K ticked over, I was remarkably relaxed with a drink in my hand because we'd done that bit that we needed to do, and that wasn't a concern.
Yeah, the countdown, the New Year countdown was slightly nervous for a lot of CEOs.
Oh my gosh.
Bizarre. The whole thing is so bizarre to me, but it was very real at that time, wasn't it?
It was a beautiful anti-climax when it happened.
It was, yes.
Here we were expecting the lights to go out, and shockingly, it was business as usual.
Absolutely, absolutely. So opportunity came up, I believe, early 2000s to join IBM, yeah?
So again, having started out in my little 12-person Kinesis and ended up in big PWC. PWC, this was around the time of Enron, and PWC sold its consulting business to IBM. So we were on the border of becoming Monday. But actually, as a result of all the changes and the separation of duties, PWC sold its consulting business to IBM.
Right. And I didn't know that. Wow, that's a huge acquisition then.
Yeah,
wow.
So it was my journey from a 12-person company to a 380,000 person machine was complete at that point.
So you didn't technically change jobs a couple of times, quite a few times, but you hadn't actually left the organization you joined. It just kept getting acquired, yeah?
Gareth, I never had to change jobs because the business around me kept changing. It was wonderful. It gave me a whole career without ever actually having to move.
Absolutely. So looking back now then from that period, a huge part of your career from 94 right up until 2010, 13 when you ultimately left IBM, that chunk now. Looking back now in your sort of armchair, what were the key milestones of that period, do you think, for you? What stands out as the most memorable moments of that segment of your career that have shaped you as an individual and as a leader?
No, it's a great question, Gareth. I think I'd divide it up into those blocks. I think ICI and Zeneca gave me those great foundations about how to conduct yourself in business, how to run projects. I was fortunate with working with great people who gave a good foundation. Yeah. Kinesis for me was the startup period, that immediacy of a startup, the highs, the lows, the impact you can have in a smaller organization just gave me that taste for the need to do things quickly, the need to act, personal responsibility. I think during the Coops and Lybrand PWC period, that was all about how do you scale this? How do you move something that you can do within one team locally across multiple teams globally? Yeah. And learning the complexity of different cultures when you scale that up. And then my real takeaway from IBM was during that period, I had a chance to live and work in the States and to live and work in Switzerland. And the old anecdote of it's one thing to go and work in a country and then go home afterwards versus live there. That really gave me an appreciation for the true difference in cultures, even where, for example, with the US, you speak the same language, the way of doing business is different. So along the way, I've been fortunate to experience those differences and hopefully add to my kit bag.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that cultural difference between maybe the US and Europe, let's say, or maybe the UK, the gap has closed a little bit as the internet has obviously made the world a smaller place? Do you see what I mean? Do you think from those IBM days to now, or do you still see a big cultural difference between the two territories?
It's a brilliant question. I think superficially, that gap has closed. So we're more used to being on Zoom calls, Teams calls, speaking real time with people while looking at them. But I actually think underlying the way that people think, the way that the cultural foundations actually haven't changed. And I think as we go forward, that importance, which I think we're all starting to relearn again, about face-to-face contact, about spending time in person with people, is as important now as it ever was.
Yeah, 100%.
And actually, I think it stops us from hoping beyond reality that we have all become homogenized and we think and act and behave in the same way, because we're not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's interesting. I wanted to talk about EY then. So you joined EY in the early to mid 2010s. What I want to ask you about, Chris, is what were people talking about in the life sciences world around that time in the early to mid 2010s? I'm assuming there was a big cloud. Everything was about cloud, I guess, around that time. What did you walk into with EY? What was going on in the world at that time from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, so it was interesting because in my role in EY, I was very fortunate, and part of my job was to go around to talk to senior leaders, owners of pharmaceutical companies, members of the boards, and just talk about what was new and what was interesting. Now, one area that we discussed a lot was market access, pricing and reimbursement of drugs, which barely a day goes by without something being in the press about, as society tries to balance the cost of healthcare and the benefits, having to make some difficult trade-offs there. But I would say around that period, there was a real focus on that, about how to start to have that conversation. So a lot of conversations on that. Believe it or not, back then, there was a pervasive digital. What does digital mean? And it was this notion of starting to move beyond technology to replace a task that was done with something that would just automate like for like, into transforming the way that we thought and we act using internet or intranet-based technologies.
Yeah.
So that was very much a theme, and everyone talked about it, but actually making it real, especially at those senior levels, was quite new. And so talked a lot about that. And then actually what was weird at that time was I'd go around and senior leaders would start to ask about Veeva, which is obviously where I am now.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, here was something that was different. It was proper cloud-based software designed for the industry that was built from scratch. And so for the first time, people who never really taught detail of technology were starting to talk about that as well. So really those key areas.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So can you just tell us about that time in your life then when the Veeva opportunity came along? You obviously were familiar with them as they were in your world. The opportunity come along to join them. Why did you jump ship with EY, and what attracted you to joining an organization like Veeva?
First off, I was very happy at EY. It's a great organization, great people. And I had a phone call one day from Peter Gassner, who's the founder of Veeva. And I've met Peter multiple times over the years, along with his co-founder, Matt Wallach. Always liked them, and obviously was becoming an increasing admirer of what they were achieving across the industry. And Peter called up one day and said, Chris, we're thinking about how we can become more impactful in Europe. We're conscious that we're a US-based company that has been successful in Europe, but we want to be more European in Europe. Would you be interested? So I thought about this for about a second and said yes as quickly as I could before Peter changed his mind, because actually, for the first time, I could see a company that was doing properly a lot of what I'd been trying to do throughout the course of my career. So a lot of the work that I'd done before with client-server technologies, we would implement, and then 10 years, sometimes less, later, 5-10 years later, we'd come back and we'd have to re-implement it because the software decayed over time, the integrations decayed, and you'd effectively have to rebuild it, but on the newer version of the platform. Veeva with client server challenged this, but was also thinking beyond each of the silos with more targeted capabilities. I'd seen a whole bunch of the people that I'd loved working with over the years end up at Veeva. Everyone was talking about Veeva, and I thought, you know what? I would definitely like to be a part of that journey.
Fantastic. So you jumped in the deep end. Can you just lay it out at a very high level, obviously? What problem is Veeva Systems Systems trying to solve for enterprise customers in the life sciences space?
So first of all, just a little bit about Veeva. Veeva is an organization which is dedicated to the life sciences industry. Our aim is to build the industry cloud for life sciences. The aim is to bring software, data, and consulting best in class, designed fit for purpose to elevate the industry, to make the industry more efficient and more effective so that it can do the valuable work that it does, helping people, helping improve their lives through better medicines and delivering those more efficiently.
Peter called you up then to come on board. What was the brief? What was the target? What was the vision? You know what I mean? What did you go in to achieve in your role?
So it was, as I touched on, it was to make Veeva Europe more European. So the challenge you have as a very successful US tech company is you come into Europe and it's natural to speak English. So coming into Veeva, we had a collection of amazing people, real talent from across the industry. But, for example, in France, we were all too often trying to have conversations in English, not in French. Or in Germany, we didn't have full coverage so that we could have those important customer meetings in German if people wanted to have them in German. Same in Italy, same in Spain. So what we set about doing was really trying to localize the front end of the business. Whilst at the same time, what really made Veeva different, and even to this day is still truly special, is we're probably the most globally integrated, globally thinking companies that I have ever worked with or for, which gives us a great benefit in an industry like life sciences, which is itself truly global. So if you can combine that magic of a company that thinks and acts globally, but with the personal touch of a local language, conversation, and culture at the point of conversation, that's the sweet spot. And that's really the journey we've been on.
Yeah, of course. So you allow pharmaceutical companies, your customers, and I know you work with some of the biggest life sciences firms in the world, like Bayer and Novartis and so on and so forth. But you enable them, so everything is integrated from ERP, CRM, so all the products that a big organization like that would need to operate internally and externally as well. Is that how you would describe the suite of products?
No, we're actually a little bit different. Probably a good way of thinking about it is SAP automates the back office. It does all the finances, supply chain, all of those pieces. We're focused on the front of house. So specifically, we help in R&D, and by that we mean clinical, safety, regulatory. So all the areas where you discover and prove a new medicine and then you register it. We also support the quality parts of the organization so that you make sure that you're behaving in a compliant and consistent way. And then we support the commercial end of the business, so sales, marketing, medical, where you take those medicines to market in a compliant and controlled way.
Right, gotcha. So in terms of AI and data transforming the way many organizations, the way they take drugs from discovery to launch, how has that changed your product set in terms of implementing AI capability into various components and stuff like that? What have you developed within your product set over the last couple of years in relation to this explosion of innovation around AI and large language models especially?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, Gareth, that when you actually look at large language models, and it's easy to forget, they've only been around a couple of years. It's a level of excitement and buzz, and yet we're still only in the early days.
The infancy of it,
In my past, when I worked for IBM, for example, I worked on Watson for Life Sciences. And those early days of Watson, as that was the transformative technology. So we've come a long way since then. What we're doing within Veeva, though, on AI, we do think this is going to be transformational over the next few years. So The first products that we're releasing around AI will be coming out this year, predominantly in the commercial space. And we're covering a range of applications, including support for our CRM users to plan meetings, to make sure they've got the right content in a meeting, to improve interactions with healthcare providers. We're looking at the power of voice to transform both how you interact with technology, but also, for example, for a medic to record a meeting with a senior medical leader so that you can focus on the conversation, not on taking notes.
Sure.
And then other areas such as producing compliant content for use in medical interactions and helping support the laborious and challenging process of making sure that everything that you publish is compliant with what you're allowed to publish. But then through the course of next year, we're infusing AI into pretty much every single application we have. So looking at how we can support clinical, regulatory, safety, quality with specific AI use cases, again, compliant and specifically designed for the users of those systems.
Yeah. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. Be Digital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. Be Digital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology license management and data remediation and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, Be Digital have just developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to bedigitaluk.com to find out more and get in touch. Have you rolled any of these AI features out yet? And if so, what's the feedback been from customers so far?
So we've got the first use cases in use with some of our data products today that provide automated summaries. We have a tool called Link, which provides deep data about key opinion leaders or healthcare providers to improve the conversation with them. Now, at this stage, that's very much more creating summaries out of medical interactions or about individuals. And what's been very telling is that it's both exciting and people have just consumed it almost seamlessly. So I think as we get more and more used to AI-based summaries coming into our day-to-day lives, with the Link products, they've been seamless. With our other products, and specifically around the CRM space, we actually think that they are going to be a bit more transformative. And already we're looking at how do we provide the support so that people don't just have these capabilities but never make the most of it, and instead reimagine the art of the possible with this new expanded capability. So become more effective to improve each interaction, to build off previous interactions so that you have a higher value conversation and the valuable time that physicians spend with pharmaceutical companies is enhanced.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, Chris, was my understanding, at least, is of the life sciences space, and especially pharmaceuticals, is that it's obviously a very highly regulated space. So innovation, things like digital transformation, for instance, tends to be a little bit slower than some other industries for that reason. And there's other headwinds as well, but ultimately the regulation part, and rightly so, is a huge headwind for digital innovation. And please correct me if I'm wrong. But what I'm keen to ask you about is COVID and the years around COVID, because from what conversations I've had on this podcast generally, is that COVID, like in many other major organizations across all industries, sort of accelerated digital transformation, especially within life sciences, because it had to. It was by necessity. So what I'm keen to ask you, Chris, is how, in the years since COVID, I wanted to ask you this question more of an industry lens as opposed to a Veeva lens, but in terms of the pharma landscape, how much has it evolved since the COVID years? What's accelerated, in your view, in terms of digital innovation, digital transformation since the COVID years to today?
This is very much still a talking point within the industry. I think has been well reported the work that the industry did at a time when we really needed the industry more than ever before to let us get out of our houses and for the world to restart again by developing drugs from scratch and then getting those through approvals and doing that in an environment where we were all locked down and staying at home really challenged the art of the possible. As you mentioned, it's a compliant industry where there are accepted norms for how you do things for very good reason, because they've been built up over time. But COVID challenged that. COVID challenged the notion that, for example, a rep had to go and meet with a physician in person because they couldn't. A video call, a phone call could start to take over. It challenged the time it took for a regulator to approve a drug. The regulatory packages for COVID were put together in a fraction of the time. Testing, the way that drugs were tested, they still adhered to all the same rules and regulations, but were done in a compressed period by overlapping tasks. So that was a great learning for the industry. So going forward, I think it's given a lot of energy to those in the industry who are trying to transform it, those in the industry who wanted to bring new ways of working, new technologies, much greater distribution of teams, but more effective co-working between those teams. And actually, as a result of COVID, what happened there was that obviously the number of new drugs coming to market went down because people can operate in the same way. And between 25 and 2030, we're going to see a massive number of drugs come to market. And companies are once more, and it's an aftershock of COVID, are going to have to launch a vastly increased number of drugs, keeping headcount broadly the same in that catch-up post-COVID. So I think that shockwave of innovation is going to have its next run in the next 5-year period.
So that compressed regulatory approval that happened in those COVID years, has that improved the timescales of approval indefinitely, would you say, Chris, then? Or has it gone back to pre-COVID levels now? Or is it roughly the same?
I think it's too early to tell. I think just given the nature of the timelines associated, what I would say, certainly within pharmaceutical companies, is it's given a hunger for there is a better way, there is a faster way, and it's okay to innovate, it's okay to challenge. I do see as pervasive. Whether we see this embedded in the industry, again, I think we'll really know in the next few years. Too early to tell.
No, of course. But one thing that does seem to be happening is the rise of the chief digital officer and the chief data officer within the pharmaceutical world. Okay. And this is a trend that's been happening for quite a long time, probably pre-COVID, but especially the last couple of years, it's become increasingly prominent. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what do you think is driving that shift, and how is it changing the way pharma companies, especially, or life sciences companies, think about innovation and data?
So it's interesting. I think what we've seen is that the CIO role, then we had the chief digital officer, and then the chief data officer. I think we're starting to see the consolidation of those actually now coming back. So those companies that went earlier. And I think the reason why it happened and the reason why it's so important is that the CIO role became increasingly about how do we keep those core systems functioning and doing that in an efficient and effective way. And as a result, the balance shifted from creating the new to keeping the lights on. So there we saw the rise of the chief digital officer. And the chief digital officer, their role was to innovate, to challenge. Going back to my time in EY, where it was, how is digital going to transform the world? What can we do with technology to remove the need for people having to go and fill in paper forms, for example?
Yeah,
And then the
sure.
third element of this, which I think is really following on from the trends around, first of all, analytics and big data, and now natural language processing and AI, is analytics and AI are reliant upon great data. And actually,
Absolutely.
when people talk about all the sexy stuff that AI does, the bulk of many of these legacy projects would just fix the data. So I think companies have realized it's easy to make AI work in small, isolated pockets. But if you're truly going to solve that at scale, you've got to have integrated data that is coherent across the span of what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah. And that plays into your hands, Chris, because you help organizations with that problem, don't you?
It's exactly that. And it's not a problem that's going to be solved overnight, which is what's interesting. We all want it to be solved now.
Yeah.
But actually, one of the things we're doing, for example, are working on industry standards for the whole industry that we're publishing, making available to everyone, but also thinking how we can embed those in all of our tools to better integrate them. Because we do see that, and I think the reason why many of these elements are coming together is that, yes, you need the technology to continue to operate, to keep the lights on. But we have a chance now with a range of new technologies, of which AI is the poster child, to really transform the way that we do business. And all of that requires that to come together with the data, the software, but also the organization to really challenge the status quo and do things differently in a way that COVID showed us that we could.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Can I ask you about the impact on, more broadly speaking as well? I'm not talking specifically about your specific space, but just the SaaS industry and how you think that's going to be impacted by AI, but by organizations being able to create their own software on demand for specialist things, specialist tasks. Do you think that is just only going to affect maybe the smaller SaaS companies, or do you see this as a challenge to all software companies going forward?
Oh, it's a super question. So I think divide it into its blocks. I think if we look at the opportunity for natural language models to help generate code quicker, faster, better, I think we're seeing that today. It's already pretty incredible in that space. And I think it's probably one of the strongest use cases for natural language processing. But I also think it creates a lot of opportunities as well. If you look at it, going back to that example of the best AI has the best data, what companies like us have is we have curated data, systems of record, and an intimate understanding about the data and the controls on that within our systems. So I think there's a huge opportunity for SaaS companies to work with those big natural language models as they evolve and grow, but to apply them to the system of record to create better insights, better understanding. So the way we think about it is when it comes to the life science industry, we're able to move faster than anyone else and at more scale because we understand our data, our software. SAP is going to be able to do that with its software in the ERP space. Microsoft is going to be able to do that with its Office products in its space because it understands those. So I think with any new technology, it's about understanding the opportunity and the threats. And I think the winners will be the ones that thread the needle between those two.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think bespoke software application creation on demand is potentially going to affect the organizations who make small bespoke applications, perhaps. Do you know what I mean? But for the kind of thing, the game you're playing, it shouldn't really make much of a difference, I wouldn't have thought. But time will tell. I agree with everything you said.
I think, if anything, for us, it's just a massive opportunity because, like you say, it's difficult to create a platform at scale. And when you've got that, the opportunity that these natural language models provide to us is just vast. And as we talked about earlier, Gareth, We're really in the very, very early stages of exploiting that.
But the value you will be able to give your customers, do you know what I mean, off the back of the data you have is
huge.
immeasurable, isn't it? It's like going straight on the top line and the bottom line, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's what I understand is very exciting. But can I ask you about a couple of things about AI? First of all, AI washing, okay? Maybe in the SaaS world, this is probably more prevalent than most other places. Anything that's got any level of automation seems to have the word AI thrown on it. Chris, please break down for us, what's real AI and what's AI washing?
So I think it's the level of autonomy or insight that it provides. As you say, one of my absolute bugbears are people taking fairly basic analytics and calling it AI. Very simplistically, I'd put it into two buckets of AI. I think there's machine learning, of which there is still very much a role.
Yeah.
So this was very much what IBM did with Watson, which was how do you take a vast amount of information and codify it to give a better answer? And there are some really good transformational things that have been done with that. One of the best examples is an initiative called EU Resist, which helps with the diagnosis and treatment of HIV patients by working out what drug combination to give an individual. And machines are just better at doing it because you can keep updating them and they get better over time. I think what's really interesting where we are at the moment is as we move into large language models and the opportunity they provide there, it's a whole different way of thinking. You can ask it a question without specifically training it on that data because it's already seen the whole bolus of information. So because you've got that whole universe of information already within it, you can ask the question directly without having to pre-train it. Now, there is an intermediate step about putting controls on that. But in essence, if it's one of those two, I'd call it AI.
Right. That's the Turing test or the Moore test we've got.
Exactly. I don't think we're quite at the Turing test in many instances yet. But no, I love your comment about AI whitewashing, and it's so true.
Yeah, there's a lot of it around at the moment. But thanks for that. It was a bit of a clickbaity question, but I couldn't resist chucking it in. But on a more serious note, I have to ask you about regulation. We've touched upon the importance of regulation in your world. Do you have any thoughts on the emergence of AI and large language models within, let's say, the pharmaceutical space especially? And what challenges will the regulators have as this technology proliferates? Maybe let's focus on large language models. And how can the regulators stay up to date on this and make sure it's getting regulated? Organizations are doing things correctly because drug discovery and drug launch is a very important field and something we should be shining a light on. How can they stay abreast of what's going on and ensure things are getting regulated correctly?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question in the life sciences space because of the very nature of what we do. The sort of advantage life sciences has compared to other industries is it's already regulated. So in other words, if you launch a drug to market, you have to prove that drug works, what populations it works in, and what are the limitations to that use. And you have to provide evidence to it. So I think when we look at the use of AI, it's really in a support function to getting there, as opposed to, for example, replacing humans or replacing those checks and balances. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about AI-discovered drugs, looking at drug targets and potential ways of solving those. Super interesting space. Looking at understanding where you've got drug safety cases coming through. So if there's an adverse event, is it something that's meaningful? I think AI will be very prevalent there. Looking at how you can better support people in their day-to-day activities about remaining compliant. But there's already pretty good checks and balances that if you make a claim, that you can support the claim. I think the interesting challenge is actually more for industries that are less regulated, and how you use and deliver those technologies. And in particular, where they're dealing with our private information and what they're doing with it. And obviously, there's a lot written around copyright as well. Ironically, life sciences has a little bit of a head start there because ultimately you've still always got to prove it.
Yeah. Can I ask you then, Chris, what are you most fearful of in terms of generative AI and agentic AI getting out of control? Is there anything in particular you're cautious about? Is there anything in particular that you think the regulators really need to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think data security is super important.
I thought you were going to say that.
I think the nature of the data that we manage in life sciences is very personal. It is very important. It's also very important that it's kept secure at the stages of drug development, but equally accessible so that you can spot issues or concerns with drugs early and deal with those early. So for me, that's the biggest area. And then making sure that as companies contribute their data or people contribute the data, it is explicit what it's going to be used for, where and how. And if that changes for any reason, there is a mature conversation about that's happening and consent is given.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So can I ask you in terms of security then very quickly, when you especially for your customers, what kind of main sort of issues do you, or what advice do you give to your customers in terms of achieving a good security posture with their data?
Yeah.
We talk a bit about IT asset management, software asset management, and things like that. But what kind of issues come up, and what advice do you give to your customers on achieving a better security posture?
Yeah, so we're a little bit different in that we work with most of the industry. So it's rare now that there's a life sciences company that doesn't have a bit of our software.
Yeah.
So what we do is we hold that data on their behalf, and we keep it in their secure environment, safe and unique to them. And then where there is industry data, we work directly with them to share anonymized data for the good of the industry, but only with their consent. So I think what we aim to do is keep their data secure and managed. And as we look to innovate with that data in some of the things we've just talked about, Gareth, what we look to do is have that mature, sensible two-way dialogue so that we're doing it with the industry, for the industry, not to the industry.
Gotcha.
And so it's a little less about us advising them, and it's more a conversation between us.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So Veeva recently announced the end of its 10-year partnership with Salesforce. What was the rationale behind that decision, and how do you see it shaping the company's future?
So it was a natural step for us to go to. So when we were very first formed, and actually the relationship goes back to 2007, Peter Gassner, our founder, used to work with Mark Benioff at Salesforce. And when he left, did a deal with Mark to take the Salesforce platform and to introduce it with industry verticals across a range of industries. And so the first industry he started with was life sciences. And Salesforce had always been designed as being best-in-class cross-industry CRM. And it is fantastic CRM. And for that reason, Peter started in the life science industry with Salesforce CRM and built the Veeva application on top of that. Now, incidentally, having started in the life science industry, there was a soon realization from both Peter and Matt that actually here was an industry that didn't have great software and would benefit from an organization taking best-in-class engineering and applying it to the specific challenges. So as they did that, the next step was, as they went from CRM to content, the realization that Salesforce doesn't support content. So whereas in life sciences, you need it to be able to support data, process, and content, all in a harmonized platform. So our next applications were all built on our own Vault platform that was designed from day one for life sciences. So roll that forward, we realized that the vast majority of what we call our CRM was actually all Veeva product, and less of it was Salesforce. Whilst at the same time, having started in CRM, we'd expanded our Vault platform to cover all the rest of the value chain.
Sure.
So ultimately, it was a decision that we'd reached the end of the road contractually, but also from an innovation point of view on the Salesforce platform. And hence, we made the decision to move it to our own purpose-built platform for life sciences.
Yeah.
So reverting so that we would unify amongst all of our 50 applications on Vault, our CRM would return to fold on that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, that's great. So I asked you earlier on about what you were most fearful of in terms of the impact of AI on the life sciences space, or cautious about rather. But what are you most excited about, Chris?
Oh, I think the challenge with healthcare and life sciences is that the good news is we're all growing older, but the bad news is as we grow older, lots more goes wrong with us. And it gets more complicated and more difficult to fix. So there is a limitless demand for better healthcare, better drugs. And the trouble is society can only afford to pay a certain amount of GDP into that. So I think the opportunity we have with AI and with technology is that the more we can help the industry to become more efficient, more effective, to move faster, we can solve more of, or the industry can solve more healthcare issues so that we can lead happier, more fulfilling, productive lives. And the part that we play is to make the industry more efficient and effective in pursuit of that, which certainly for me and for all of the folks here at Veeva, I think that's really our unifying passion. How can we play our part towards that important goal?
Very well said. No, that's fantastic. So let's finish on this one then, Chris. Looking back now, and I know you've got a long way to go in your career, I'm very sure. If you were to talk to that guy, that 21-year-old who just left university and didn't have a clue what he wanted to do with his life, what would you say to that guy, Chris? What advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
So it's funny with two boys, 17 and 18. I ponder this, and of course, I don't know what your kids are like. I know your daughters are a bit younger, but of course, 17, 18-year-old boys don't listen to anyone. Assuming my 21-year-old self would have listened to anyone, which hopefully I would have. Honestly, what I would say, and I would say this to any of our graduates coming through as well, is be curious, go and learn new things. Find spaces where other people aren't and make yourself useful there. And all the way through, surround yourself with passionate people who work hard and who want to make a difference, because they will just elevate you. And then my final thing I would say is never shy away from challenging or being challenged, because without that, you never, ever get better. So if you've got great people that you trust who are additive to you, embrace that and challenge them, get them to challenge you, and together you'll always be better.
Fantastic. And what a great way to end. Chris, that's brilliant advice. Thank you so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Where can people find out more about Veeva and keep tabs on what you're up to?
Veeva.com is a great place to go and look. And we are present all through LinkedIn and other platforms. If anyone needs to find out any more, then Veeva.com is probably the best place to start.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thank you very much, Gareth. It's been a pleasure.
Wow, that was a great conversation. Chris was very easy to talk to. I found him quite engaging and he seemed to flow quite well. I hope that came across. But I think I could emphasize a lot of that conversation, but I think the things that really stood out for me in this conversation was Chris's clarity on the difference between genuine AI innovation and sort of AI washing. I think, if you want to, for want of a better term, true generative and agentic AI are already transforming many things within the life sciences world, accelerating R&D, improving decision-making, et cetera, but there are a couple of things which are not really AI. They're just a line of code or automation or something. So there's a lot of products out there which have been AI washed, for want of a better term. And I think it was good to hear Chris's take on that and what constitutes AI and what constitutes non-AI, which, organizations and generally people need to be vigilant about. I really enjoyed Chris's take on the critical importance of securing enterprise data as well and ensuring that AI adoption is, controlled and value driven. So it was good to get his take on that as well. But look, these insights aren't just relevant for life sciences. They're a blueprint for any organization looking to navigate the AI landscape safely and effectively. But yeah, it was really, really fascinating to get his take. But thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to subscribe or leave a review or even share it with a colleague. It really helps us. Anyway, I'm out. See you on the next one. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. Be Digital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. Be Digital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology, license management, and data remediation, and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, Be Digital have developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to Be Digital UK to find out more and get in touch.